Call the hearing to order. Good morning. The committee meets today to receive testimony from General Kenneth McKenzie, Commander of the United States Central Command, and General Stephen Townsend, Commander of the United States Africa Command. Thank you both for your service, and I'm grateful to the men and women serving under your commands. And I understand this will likely be the last appearance before this committee for both of you, and I thank you for your dedicated, diligent service to the nation and to the men and women you've led over all these years. And thanks also to your families who stood by you and sustained you throughout this distinguished career. Thank you. Central Command remains one of our most challenging theaters. One of its many responsibilities, Centcom's top priority is deterring the Iranian regime's destructive and destabilizing activities without undue provocation. This is a complicated and urgent mission. Just this weekend, Iran claimed responsibility for a missile strike near the American consulate in Erbil, Iraq. This strike comes on the heels of escalating malign behavior by Iran and its proxies, who continue to mount drone and missile attacks in the region, including against military bases in Iraq and Syria, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. On the nuclear front, in the 5 years since then-President Trump pulled out of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, Iran has made key advances. It has decreased breakout time to several weeks from a year under the agreement. It has increased uranium enrichment to 60% instead of just under 4% allowed under the agreement. Iran has hardened its infrastructure and replaced damaged equipment with more advanced models. And while negotiations to return Iran to the JCPOA are in the final stages, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has introduced new complications. General McKenzie, given these current dynamics, I would like your thoughts on how best to respond to Iranian malign behavior in the region, including collaborating with allies and partners to counter drone and missile attacks while preserving space to return to the JCPOA. Last August marked the end of our 20-year military mission in Afghanistan. Despite transitioning all forces from Afghanistan, the Biden administration has maintained its commitment to ensuring that Afghanistan cannot be used as a base for ISIS-K, al-Qaeda, and other terrorist groups to conduct attacks against the United States or its allies. As such, we have assumed an over-the-horizon posture to counter and degrade such threats, and I would ask for an update on our capabilities and whether additional regional agreements have been reached to ensure we have a robust counterterrorism architecture to address the threats from these terrorist groups. Africom presents a similarly complex array of responsibilities. The security situation in East Africa has been on a downward trajectory following the previous administration's decision to withdraw the majority of U.S. military personnel from Somalia in December 2020. Since then, U.S. forces have been conducting periodic engagements to train and advise Somali partners. However, as you note in your testimony, General Townsend, U.S. and partner efforts to disrupt and degrade the most dangerous violent extremist organizations have not achieved the success we need. The Biden administration is taking a comprehensive look at our strategy in Somalia. I hope you will share your views on the current security situation as well as the status of our engagement with Somali partners. The security situation in West Africa is also increasingly fragile. Over the past 2 years, extremist operations have expanded across the Sahel, including pushing down into the littoral states in the Gulf of Guinea. Political unrest in Chad has led to the departure of all non-essential U.S. personnel, and high-profile attacks against civilian and military targets in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have increased. These extremist groups are not currently capable of carrying out attacks outside the region, but several have professed their intent to do so. Given these challenges, General Townsend, I would like to know what we can feasibly accomplish with partner security forces and how sustainable our posture is in such a politically fractured environment. Finally, both Centcom and Africom play important roles in our long-term strategic competition with China and Russia. In the Middle East and Central Asia, Russia continues to leverage hybrid warfare capabilities to expand its own influence and stymie Western security interests. China has also increased its presence in the region, including by deepening economic and security ties with Iran. And on the African continent, both Russia and China are looking to expand their security and economic investments and may seek to leverage such access to undermining U.S. influence in critical regions. During today's hearing, I hope we will discuss your efforts to engage with partners and the ways in which the United States can best leverage its competitive advantages to maintain key relationships. Thank you again to our witnesses. I look forward to your testimonies. As a reminder for my colleagues, there will be a closed session immediately following this hearing in room SVC 217. Now, let me welcome back the ranking member and recognize the ranking member. Senator
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I join you in welcoming our witnesses and thank them for their decades of service. I think particularly with didn't get the order of that, but anyway, it's appreciate the time that we've worked together and the short time remaining for certainly some of them. I see three challenges in Centcom: Iran's terrorist proxies acting more aggressively, our partners increasingly doubt in America's resolve, and Russia and China trying to fill that void. These challenges are a direct result of, in my opinion, of President Biden's misguided policies. He downgraded support to our partners against Iran and its proxies. He reversed President Trump's terrorist designation of the Houthis, and he offered Iran massive sanctions relief to rejoin the failed 2015 Iran deal, even as Iran increases its aggression against us. Iran is the foremost threat in the region, yet our partners see the administration's appeasement of Iran and ask themselves, are we really on our own? Is America abandoning us? Last summer's disastrous drawdown from Afghanistan, which culminated in the killing of 13 service members, only reinforced these questions. We also face significant challenges in Africa, including the growing presence and capability of the jihad groups across the continent. China and Russia are exploiting Africa to de-establish our partners' project, their military power, and expand the influence at our expense. I've always viewed Africa as critical to our nation's security, which is why I pushed for the creation of Africom. That was back in 2007, and it's right now more of a concern than it was at that time. General Townsend, I'll speak more about this issue the issue of Western Sahara during my questions, but I'm pleased the Secretary provided guidance to assess alternative locations and hosts for DoD exercises in Africa, including the annual African Lion exercise. This will be crucial to ensuring we grow better relationships in Africa and help reverse the tide of our strategic competition with China and Russia. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Inhofe. Let me now recognize General McKenzie for his statement. General, thank you, sir.
Chairman Reed, Ranking Member Inhofe, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to testify for the final time regarding U.S. Central Command's posture in an area of responsibility that encompasses 21 nations and 600 million people, and it's at the strategic nexus of the world's most important corridors of trade. Much has transpired since I last delivered my annual posture testimony, most notably the conclusion of our military campaign in Afghanistan and Russia's recent invasion of Ukraine. America's interests in the central region and the challenges we confront there have proven remarkably resilient. CENTCOM's mission to direct and enable military operations and activities with allies and partners to increase regional stability in support of enduring U.S. interests is essentially unchanged from the day of the command's founding. The primary threats to that security and stability are also very familiar. Centcom was established nearly 40 years ago to counter the malign influence of a revolutionary regime that had seized power in Tehran and to compete with a great power that had, in spite of international condemnation, invaded the sovereign state of Afghanistan and imposed a puppet regime. Today, Iran is no less of a threat to American interests or to the stability of the region than it was in 1979. To the contrary, the threat posed by Iran is graver than ever. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, moreover, has violently demonstrated its willful regard for international norms, just as we have seen through Russia's actions in Syria and elsewhere, in fact, anywhere it sees an opportunity to diminish confidence in America's leadership. In a more measured fashion, China is also vying for increased influence at American expense in a region it depends upon for over 40% of its fossil fuels. Meanwhile, violent extremist organizations, or VEOs, in the Centcom area continue to pose a credible threat to the homeland. In sum, the Central region remains today a vital and volatile arena for strategic competition and the decisive theater in the campaign against VEOs. The campaign to defeat the so-called Islamic State in Iraq and Syria has entered a new phase. As of 1 January of this year, Iraq has assumed sole responsibility for counter-ISIS combat operations on its own soil. In Syria, Centcom and its partners are degrading ISIS' ability to regenerate by improving the security of the facilities for detained ISIS fighters, as well as the displaced persons camps, IDP camps, where their families reside. More than half of this population comes from other countries, and addressing the threat of ISIS in northeast Syria ultimately will require these countries to reclaim and repatriate whatever citizens of theirs remain in these prisons and camps, ending one of the world's worst humanitarian crises and depriving ISIS of what currently is fertile soil for indoctrination and spreading terror. In Afghanistan, our campaign against al-Qaeda and ISIS-Khorasan has also entered a new phase. We are now conducting this campaign from bases over the horizon. As I have said, this is difficult. It is not impossible. I should add today that we will be able to do this only so long as Centcom has the requisite resources to find, fix, and finish threats to the homeland before those threats develop the capability to conduct external operations. I'm talking specifically about ISR assets and strike platforms. Centcom has the tools it needs to perform this mission, but the margins are thin, and the risk will increase should resources diminish. I'd like to specifically address our posture in the Middle East. Here, Iran continues to pose the greatest threat to U.S. interests and the security of the region as a whole. Through its proxies and clients, Iran has fomented conflict in an arc tracing from Yemen through the Arabian Peninsula, across Iraq and Syria into Lebanon, and to the very borders of Israel. Saudi Arabia endures regular attacks from the Houthis, who wield some of the most advanced unmanned aerial systems and cruise missiles in the region, courtesy of the Iranians. Recently, the Houthis expanded these attacks to include urban centers and bases with U.S. forces in the United Arab Emirates. Tehran also enables its aligned militias in Iraq and Syria to carry on a persistent, low-level campaign of indirect fire and unmanned aerial system attacks against U.S. and coalition forces, hoping to drive us from the region. Of late, this campaign has been relatively restrained, but Iran only loosely controls the militias that conduct these attacks, and as recently as 2020, Iran demonstrated its willingness to target U.S. forces directly with its highly capable ballistic missile forces. Iran's ballistic missile forces constitute an exigent threat to the security of every state in the region. Among them, our most important and enduring partners. They continue to look to the United States for assurance that we, the historic partner of choice in the region, will remain a reliable one. China and Russia are also watching closely for any sign that America's commitment to the collective security of the region is wavering, and they are poised to capitalize on whatever opportunities emerge. In closing, let me thank you again for this opportunity to testify. I'd like to thank the soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, Coast Guardsmen, and Guardians who have served and sacrificed in the Centcom AOR. It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve as their commander. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General McKenzie. General Townsend, please.
Chairman Reed, Ranking Member Inhofe, and distinguished members of the committee, good morning. Thank you for inviting me to appear today, even as the eyes of the world are focused on Russia's lawless attack on Ukraine, an unjust war which impacts Africa as well. For nearly 3 years, it's been a great privilege, the privilege of my career, to represent the dedicated members of U.S. Africa Command. Thank you for your steadfast support for them and for our mission. I'm here this morning with my battle buddy and command senior enlisted leader, Sergeant Major Richard Thresher, and my friend, General Frank McKenzie, as we make our final appearances before you. Our joint testimony highlights continued and pressing challenges and opportunities faced by our respective commands and our nation. Together with our interagency teammates, U.S. Africom protects and advances U.S. strategic interests, prevents strategic distraction, and preserves America's options, all in concert with our allies and partners. As Africom's 5th commander, I have come to learn 5 truths about Africa. First, America cannot ignore Africa. Africa's challenges, opportunities, and security interests are inseparable from our own. Weak or poor governance, conflict, and climate change stress the stability of many African nations, which will in turn impact U.S. security and prosperity. Second, our competitors clearly see Africa's rich potential. Russia and China both seek to convert soft and hard power investments into political influence, strategic access, and military advantage. China's economic and diplomatic engagements allow it to buttress autocracies and change international norms in a patient effort to claim their second continent. Russia stokes conflict, pursuing a fated aspiration to imperial power. Across the continent, mercenaries from the Kremlin's Wagner Group offer a one-stop stop for regime protection, resource exploitation, and horrific violence against Africans, just as we see in Ukraine today. Third, deadly terrorism has metastasized to Africa. Al-Qaeda's Al-Shabaab in East Africa and ISIS and Al-Qaeda groups in West Africa and elsewhere are among the world's fastest growing, wealthiest, and deadliest terrorist groups, and remain grave and growing threats that aspire to kill Americans, both there and in our homeland. Fourth, a battle between democracy and authoritarianism is raging across Africa. Despite a recent surge in democratic backsliding, our values, our democracy, and our willingness to work together with African partners creates a huge demand for U.S. engagement and partnership. Fifth, in Africa, a few troops and a few bucks still goes a long way. Modest and predictable investments yield outsized returns for U.S. and African security interests. As an economy of force and posture-limited theater, Africom employs just 0.3% of DoD's operating budget and manpower. Modest investments today can yield a continent of partners tomorrow. We are most effective when we synchronize diplomacy, development, and defense. So we are grateful for your continued leadership and backing to help field our whole-of-government leaders by confirming ambassadors and funding the State Department and USAID. Thanks to the authorities and resources you provide, and for your continued interest and support in the capabilities that Africom requires to accomplish our mission. In summary, U.S. Africom remains cheap insurance for America's security. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you very much, General Townsend. General McKenzie, do you assess that successfully concluding a nuclear deal with Iran will provide additional stability in the region, particularly with respect to proliferation of nuclear weapons, not just in Iran, but in other states, and also give to the United States and to the West essentially almost daily insights into the nuclear posture of Iran?
Chairman, a primary objective of our policy in the region is for Iran not to possess a nuclear weapon. I think the best and most effective way to get to that position is through a negotiated agreement, which I fully support. And I think that's probably the best way to actually get to that and then be able to talk about other Iranian activities in the region that are equally threatening to states that are non-nuclear in character.
Thank you very much, sir. General Townsend, What's your operational assessment of the removing the majority of U.S. forces out of Somalia to Kenya and Djibouti? And what have been the impacts on our partners?
Chairman, my view is that our periodic engagement, also referred to as commuting to work, has caused new challenges and risks for our troops. I believe my assessment is that it is not effective, it's not efficient, and it puts our troops at greater risk.
Okay. And General McKenzie, the MQ-9 strike on 29 August 2021 was a complicated and difficult situation, including civilian casualties. Your Centcom did a report, but that report was reviewed by the Air Force Inspector General, General Saeed, and he indicated that assigning the 15-6 to the same organization that conducted the strike and further assigning it to the individual that conducted the civilian casualty assessment report and didn't recommend a 15-6 was less than optimal. Real conflicts of interest or simply perceptions of conflicts of interest were too significant. Conducting the 15-6 in 4 to 5 days as directed was too rushed and didn't allow sufficient time to comprehensively assess the facts. Do you believe, concur with that conclusion?
Chairman, I concur with that conclusion.
And what steps are you taking to correct the situation in terms of standard operating procedures for Centcom?
Chairman, since that time, we've enacted 10 specific things that affect the way we conduct strike operations, the way we have oversight of strike operations, the way we investigate those strike operations. Rather than go through a list of all of them, I'll call out 3 very quickly.
Yes, sir.
The first thing we've done is we have reinvigorated and reinstitutionalized the idea of a red cell process within each strike cell. The red cell prevents the problem of confirmation bias, which is when operators sometimes under the pressure of what they believe to be, and probably is, a mortal threat, seize on a course of action and don't properly evaluate all of the possibilities, other possibilities. That's one. At the same time, I have upped the reporting of this, so these things are brought to senior leadership much more quickly, so we have an opportunity to have a good view on what's going on inside the entire system. And I particularly acknowledge the issues about who's investigating who. You cannot investigate yourself. Even if you do it right, there's still a perception there that we need to take a look at. We're taking that on directly. So a number of things within Central Command we are changing. I believe in all these cases, it's the commander at each level who needs to be the responsible officer, and you've got to get your commanders directly involved in that. And I believe we're on the path to doing that.
Thank you very much, sir. General Townsend, you indicated in your testimony that efforts in Africom, like every major combatant command, have to be whole of government. But Africa seems to be even a much more significant case where without State Department support, AID support, other departments, that your mission is not as effective. Can you elaborate a bit?
Thanks, Chairman. I think it's not only not as effective, I think it's not possible for any one arm of diplomacy, development, or defense to succeed without the other, especially in Africa. The economic challenges, the political challenges, and the security challenges are so great that we can only make headway together, and that's particularly important because we have such modest investments there, modest resources focused on the continent, so therefore we've got to all row together.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen, thank you for not only your testimony, but for your distinguished service. Thank you. Senator Inhofe, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Townsend, as I said in my opening statement, I want to talk more about the plight of the people of Western Sahara. Many of my colleagues may not be familiar with what they've been going through out there, but it's nothing short of a tragedy. The fate of the Sahrawi People has been in limbo since Western Sahara was decolonized, and the United Nations adopted the resolution calling for a referendum on self-determination in 1966. That was 1966. More than 5 decades later, no referendum has been held, and their destiny has been subjected to broken promise after broken promise by the Moroccan government. Some of the administration believe Morocco is now serious about negotiating a mutually acceptable resolution in Western Sahara after blocking it for all these years, and I couldn't disagree more. Nothing I've seen from Morocco makes me think that they're serious about the resolution, and that's why I'm pleased that the Secretary has directed you to look at alternative locations for DoD exercises in Africa, like African Lion, and in the coming years. I have more than that we want to say about Western Sahara, but we're pressed for time, so I'll submit that in writing. Now, General Townsend, I want to turn to Somalia. As you know, I opposed the last administration's decision to pull nearly all of our troops out of Somalia and move them to Djibouti and Kenya and pursue an over-the-horizon counterterrorism strategy. It increases risk and decreases our effectiveness. We're seeing this play out on the ground in Somalia as things get worse and al-Shabaab gains strength. General Townsend, you've called the al-Shabaab our primary enemy in Somalia. Your quote was the largest and most kinetically active al-Qaeda network in the world. I have 2 questions, General Townsend. Have you submitted a request to your chain of command to put DoD forces back in Somalia on a full-time basis? And if the answer is yes, then when did you submit the request? And have you gotten any response yet from that request?
Thanks, Ranking Member. All the characterizations you just relayed there about Somalia and the threat from al-Shabaab are correct. Respectfully, Senator, I have submitted advice to my chain of command, and my chain of command is still considering that advice, and I'd like to give them space to make that decision, and I can go into it in a bit more detail in closed session.
All right, thank you very much. And General McKenzie, I don't really have any further questions, but I do want to comment that it's hard for me to believe that I can see now why we're not smiling and you are smiling. Apparently, it's going to be, I think, in 2 more weeks that you'll be bailing out of here, and I wish you the best for your retirement. All right? Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Inhofe. Senator Gillibrand, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General McKenzie, thank you for your testimony. How has Israel's integration into Centcom's AOR improved coordination among U.S. regional partners, particularly as it relates to countering Iran in the Middle East and supporting over-the-horizon counterterrorism capabilities?
Senator, the entry of Israel into the AOR has given us great opportunities, particularly in the area of integrated air and missile defense, which I think is one of the most pressing issues that all of the states in the region confront when they think about Iran. And so I think of Israel coming into the AOR as sort of the operational effect of the other normalization of Israeli relations across the Gulf and with other states. We have great opportunities here, and I'll be prepared to talk a little bit more about it in the closed session.
As a follow-up, have the Abraham Accords, which have allowed for economic and military integration between Israel and the Arab state signatories, enhanced our ability to counter China's influence in the Middle East through coordinated economic policy or enhanced foreign military sales?
I think it is, on the question of China's entry into the theater, obviously I only control a small part of the perspective on that. I would say that in terms of foreign military sales, we have an opportunity here to pursue greater integration, again, particularly in the domain of air defense systems, which I think is low-hanging fruit. Everyone's interested in it, particularly since the keyword defense is in the design. These are not offensive systems. These are systems designed to protect those nations that are there.
And this question's for both General McKenzie and General Townsend. General McKenzie, China has extensive influence in the Middle East and Africa, both through its Belt and Road Initiative and through increasing foreign arms sales. Can you comment on China's economic influence within your command and your concerns that our regional partners increasingly turn to China for military assistance?
Senator, I'll begin with their economic penetration into the region. They draw a significant portion of their hydrocarbons from the region. A lot of it goes to the Strait of Hormuz. We see as a result of that, they are interested in pursuing close, deep, and economic relationships with nations that adjoin the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf itself so that they can protect that long-term investment. I believe ultimately that will move from economic to a military component. They think in the long term, but I believe that's inevitable that we're going to see that. Finally, I believe that we remain the partner of choice for military systems. Our military systems are the best in the world. You get what you pay for. You get what you pay for if you buy a Chinese system.
Thank you. General Townsend?
Thanks, Senator. There's a handout there, should be a handout there that depicts the question you're asking, China's investments across the spectrum in Africa, and it's daunting. They are investing primarily in the economic realm, and then followed by the diplomatic realm, and then to a lesser degree, the military domain. However, their military investments are playing out in Africa. They have their one overseas base there, and they are working hard to develop other overseas bases there. And I would reiterate what General McKenzie said about we remain the partner of choice, and our equipment and our training is second to none. However, it can sometimes take a bit of long time to unfold, and that sometimes forces our African partners to reach for the bird go with the bird in hand, which is sometimes China, sometimes Russia.
General Townsend, how do you view our African partners' opinion of Russia's invasion of Ukraine? Will they distance themselves from Russia based on its unprecedented action, or how do we hold them accountable if Russia is allowed to remain economically relevant to those markets?
Senator, I think if you saw the vote play out in the UN the other day, it's sort of it covers the spectrum. So about half of Africa voted to condemn Russia's invasion. The other half either voted to either abstained or did not vote. I think there was only one vote from the continent. Eritrea voted to support Russia. But it was troubling to me that half of the continent either abstained or did not vote. And I think that's because they're trying to see how this is going to play out. Many of them have strong economic ties to Russia and China, and I think they're biding their time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. Senator Fisher, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to both of you gentlemen for your service to the people of this country. During and after the retrograde, President Biden touted over-the-horizon counterterrorism operations as our new strategy to deal with the terrorist threat in Afghanistan. I expressed serious concerns with this approach, including directly to you, General McKenzie, for Centcom's, during that Centcom posture hearing last April, but was repeatedly told by the administration that challenges associated with this strategy could be overcome. General McKenzie, have we conducted any over-the-horizon strikes against ISIS-K targets in Afghanistan since August of last year?
Senator, we have conducted no strikes in Afghanistan.
Would you agree that without sustained CT pressure, terrorist groups are more able to focus on planning and preparing for external attacks?
I would agree with that statement.
Do we have any information on terrorist planning in Afghanistan?
Senator, I have considerable information on that, and I'm prepared to brief you in great detail in the closed session that will follow.
I look forward to hearing your brief on that. General McKenzie, in an interview with the Associated Press in December, you stated that we're probably at about 1 or 2% of the capabilities we once had to look into Afghanistan. Will you be telling us about that in classified as well?
I will. The brief I give you, I believe, will be exhaustive in all the disciplines of intelligence. What we had, what we have now, what the difference in those are, and you'll be able to draw your own very stark and clear conclusions from that.
Is your conclusion about the strategy that we have in dealing with the terrorist threat that we are effective or not effective in sustaining that CT pressure on the groups?
It's going to take a little time for that to play out. I believe that, as you noted earlier, sustained CT pressure is what prevents groups from being able to grow, to train, to think about plotting beyond their immediate survival. For example, up and down the Euphrates River Valley in Iraq and Syria, ISIS is unable to think beyond surviving that night or the next night. In places where they don't have that question of immediate personal survival, then the threat begins to grow. But I would like to talk about that in the closed session if I can, ma'am.
Okay. In October, Undersecretary Call told this committee that we could see ISIS-K generate the capability to conduct external operations, including against the United States, in somewhere between 6 and 12 months, and that was 5 months ago. Today, in your written testimony, you stated that, quote, the Department of Defense assesses ISIS-K could establish an external attack capability against the United States and our allies in 12 to 18 months, but possibly sooner if the group experiences unanticipated gains in Afghanistan, end quote. What has caused this intelligence estimate to shift from October, when Secretary Call made those comments, to what you're telling us today?
Again, I'll talk a little bit more about this in the closed session, but the period I gave, which is 12 to 18 months for ISIS-K, represents our best whole of intelligence community thinking on this. And it does change over time as we see groups gather, as we see groups fall apart. But I'll be able to give you a lot more detail on that in the closed session.
Okay, let me shift gears a little bit then with you, and we'll continue the CT in closed session. We look at Iran's proxies throughout Centcom, AOR, and they continue to pose a significant threat to our partners and also to our own forces in the region. What more do you think can be done to deter Iran from their malign activities?
I think we've established a very clear set of red lines with Iran, and I think as a result of that, over the last several months, their attacks have tapered off, particularly in Iraq, which I believe Iran views as the principal battleground for confronting the United States and our partners in the region. And we've been able to do that by by increasingly effective counter-UAS and other systems to defend ourselves. And at the same time, they're finding it increasingly difficult to gain any kind of political traction with the government of Iraq. I think for a long time, Iran frankly tried to pursue a political solution in Iraq that is not open to them anymore.
And do you believe that we have a good working relationship with our partners in the area in providing them defense against missiles and drones?
I believe that we do. I work very hard at the military-to-military channel with my peers, the chiefs of defense in each of these countries. I believe we do have a very good relationship with them.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. Senator King, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, two observations. One is the important day in U.S. history that this represents. 202 years ago, the state of Maine joined the Union, and I just wanted to note that. Secondly, I'm sorry that our ranking member has gone, because there's no senator that knows more about Africa than Senator Inhofe, and has committed more time and effort and diplomatic and outreach to that continent. And I just wanted to recognize that, as this may be the last posture hearing involving Africa, that he's still a member of this committee. couple of questions to follow up on Senator Fisher's questions, General McKenzie. What's the status of the ALOC with Pakistan, and do we have any understanding whatsoever with regard to the ALOC for a kinetic strike as opposed to ISR?
So right now, we are flying up the ALOC to conduct our ISR. For further discussions on that, Senator, I'd really prefer to go into the closed session, and I'll be able to answer your questions very directly in that session.
Okay. Can you give us, and I know we're going to talk about this in closed session, but since our leaving of Afghanistan late last summer, compare ISIS and al-Qaeda, because the Taliban is hostile to ISIS, not so hostile to al-Qaeda. Is the Taliban maintaining pressure on ISIS?
The Taliban is attempting to maintain pressure on ISIS. They're finding it difficult to do so. ISIS has been able to execute some high-profile attacks, even in Kabul, over the last several months. We're coming out of the winter. Traditionally, this would now begin the fighting season. It is my expectation that ISIS attacks will ramp up in Afghanistan as we go into the summer. And you are correct. You know, the Taliban is going to go after ISIS. They've done so in the past. But it's going to be a tough fight. They did not help themselves, they being the Taliban, when they released a number of prisoners from Palacharki and Parwan, over 1,000 ISIS fighters that reverted back to the group and significantly empowered the group within Afghanistan. And now they're going to reap the results of that action. So I think that's a problem for the Taliban. As for al-Qaeda, but I think they're much less firm on the al-Qaeda issue in terms of opposing them and being able to limit them, although they have done some things publicly that would tend to make you think they at least want to send the signals that they're doing. And I'll talk a little more about that in the closed session.
Thank you. I want to return to the chairman's opening questions about Iran. A deal, by definition, is something where there are things on both sides, advantages and disadvantages. One side gives up something, one side gains something. How do you assess, let's assume for a moment that there is a renewed JCPOA which significantly limits Iran's nuclear capability for the foreseeable future, for some period of years. At the same time, sanctions are relieved in some way that enables them to have additional resources, which they could put into their malign activities in the region. Would you view that as a reasonable trade-off? In other words, realizing you can't have everything, do you view a nuclear Iran as more dangerous than an Iran with more money in their pockets?
Well, Senator, as you know, Centcom is the land of less than perfect solutions. So I'm always comfortable with a less than perfect solution. It is an overriding national policy objective of the United States for Iran to not have a nuclear weapon and be able to possess a nuclear weapon. So I think that's a very important goal, and you might have to make some trade-offs to get to that point. But as at the military level, my concern is, first of all, that they not have that nuclear weapon, but I am also very concerned about the remarkable growth in number and efficiency of their ballistic missile force, their UAV program, their long-range drones, and their land attack cruise missile program. All of those concern me.
That was going to be my next question. What's our current assessment, if we can do this in an unclassified setting, of the range of Iranian missiles? In other words, can they get to Paris? Can they get to London? Can they get to New York? Or are they simply a regional weapon?
They have over 3,000 ballistic missiles of various types, some of which can reach Tel Aviv, to give you an idea of range. None of them can reach Europe yet, but over the last 5 to 7 years, Senator, they have invested heavily in their ballistic missile program. Their missiles are of significantly greater range and significantly enhanced accuracy. We saw that in the attack on al-Assad in January 2020, where their missiles hit within tens of meters of the targets they were intended to hit.
General Townsend, any buyer's remorse, or I should say borrower's remorse in Africa with regard to the relationship of these countries to China? Is there any, well, I think borrower's remorse is the right phrase. Second thoughts about these relationships?
Senator, I would say yes. We see that across the continent. So when, as you're familiar, when China started investing heavily in Africa, this term debt trap diplomacy was born.
I call it debt colonialism.
That's another way of saying it as well. I think the our African partners, by and large, are very well aware of that, and the countries that we see still hewing to China are those that, well, they're not well governed, or they're autocrats. So I think there is a growing awareness of that, and we're seeing that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator King. Senator Rounds, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, first, let me begin by saying thank you to both of you for your service to our country. Let me also thank your families for their participation as well. General Townsend, while Russia and China are aggressively expanding their physical footprint in Africa, I'm concerned with their even more aggressive and nefarious activity in cyberspace. Can you discuss how Russia and China have used cyber to advance their objectives in your AOR and how your team is combating the threat?
Senator, I'll be able to go into more detail in a closed session, but I can say this about Russia. Russia, and you're familiar with the oligarch Prigozhin. He has troll farms. He invests in troll farms in Africa, and a number of those were involved in election interference globally, to include our country, and that's continuing. We're seeing that continue with China, not as much, and I can probably go into more detail in closed session.
Thank you, sir. Also, I think Senator Inhofe hit on this, but I would like to reemphasize the challenges in the Sahrawi region, in South Sahara regions, where you have challenges where literally you've got 40,000 people that have been displaced out of their homeland, awaiting for a UN resolution or at least some sort of an opportunity for independence. And most certainly Morocco is right in the middle of it. And it seems to me that I think what Senator Inhofe has indicated is the fear that in the future, if we are not observant to the real problems that have developed there, that we're going to have a hotbed there, and it's going to be one that will not go away. And we're going to wonder why we suddenly have extremists developing in that region, recognizing, though, for the last 40 years they have been displaced from their homeland, and the rest of the world has done nothing to try to resolve the situation. I know that it's an area that you're aware of. Do you have any comments on what's going on right now in that region?
Senator, I think primarily this is a diplomatic or political problem, less a military one, but for all the things that you just mentioned, I agree with, and we are watching it.
If it's not fixed diplomatically, I fear that it will become a problem for the military. General McKenzie, I really think, along with a lot of us here, that the way that we left Afghanistan on a date certain put our military men and women in a very precarious position, and that it was not the correct way to leave Afghanistan. We believe that it was reckless, haphazard, and it endangered the lives of our servicemen and women. Our deeds helped to reshape the current worldwide operational environment, where our adversaries have been emboldened to take greater risks in challenging our national security. We also broke faith with many Afghans who directly supported U.S. forces. These brave Afghans are eligible for special immigrant visas, or SIVs, yet they're trapped and have been threatened in Afghanistan. The Washington Post has reported that Qatar Airways has been chartering 1 to 2 U.S. government flights from Kabul every week from August to December. These flights briefly stopped, then resumed after the new year began. One of the SIV applicants, who my office has assisted for the last 8 months, just recently was able to get out of Kabul, in fact, just this week, but he was forced to take a rather adventurous and long roundabout way through a third country in order to get out. Can you tell me, General, who specifically has been on these weekly flights and whether they are the Afghans who risk their lives to help our service members?
Senator, our responsibility in this matter is to support the Department of State by providing lily pads at Camp Al-Saliyah in Qatar. When people come out of Afghanistan, We process them, we make sure they're physically fit. We do all the things to move them on to their final destination, whether that's the United States or another country, the State Department's call, not our call. But we are fully committed to assisting in that. The same thing in UAE, where there's a facility that is not really run by the United States, but rather by our UAE partners. As to your question about who's coming out, who's on the flights that Qatar Airways is running out every couple of weeks, I believe they are largely SIV applicants, but Senator, I am actually not in minute-to-minute command of that information. You know, that is actually run by the Department of State. We support logistically, but those decisions fall all within the Department of State. I'll simply close by saying we have the capability to support this effort, systems and procedures in place well into the future.
Thank you. And once again, thank you to both of you for your service to our country. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Round. Senator Manchin, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both again for your service, and thank you for all the hard work you're doing here. I just have two questions, really, and whoever, I think probably General McKenzie might come to you. First of all, the Afghanistan situation. I was reading this morning an article that said basically the road from Kabul to Kandahar is now safe. Commerce is coming back a little bit, and you're seeing different roadside things going on and this and that. And basically for the peace in the country, do you see that basically to where people are embracing that and believe they have the ability to build any type of an economy whatsoever, or without our assistance? Because I read of the famine, I read of all the different hardships that are going on there also. The only economy they have was ours. That's gone.
I think I do not believe it's a particularly safe place to be. I think you can probably drive on what we'd call the ring road from Kabul down to Kandahar in a way that you couldn't do it in the past. But at the same time, we know that the Taliban is actually carrying out, searches for former Afghan government officials. We know that women are entering a new and repressive existence under their rule. So while you may not see the kind of violence that you saw over the last 10 or 15 years there, I'm not sure it's a place where anyone would want to be. And I believe the continued press of people that want to leave Afghanistan is perhaps the best indicator of just what conditions are like on the ground.
Us leaving Afghanistan the way we did, does it leave us in worse shape as far as with our allies?
I think too soon to tell, but I think what our principal goal in Afghanistan was and remains to ensure that attacks against the United States are not going to be generated from there, from Al-Qaeda and from ISIS-K.
And right now you believe that we have subdued that from happening, or are they building back up again?
Sir, I believe it is much harder to do it now than it was before. It is not impossible to do it, but I'll have considerable level of detail on that in the closed session.
Putin's war on Ukraine with the energy, it's an energy war. Putin's war on Ukraine and what we're going through there, and also seeing us now, I have a little bit of a concern with the administration's position on the energy that we produce in our country, and we could do a little bit more working with our Canadian and our Mexican allies. With that being said, the Iran situation that we're talking, I think things have stalled there on the Iran deal again, but also I'm concerned about Iran. The last deal that we made with Iran was not made on basically winning or earning your way back into a productive society from the standpoint we were giving them too many reliefs on their sanctions up front, and they never did come through. With Iran's situation right now and the oil that we have and the sanctions that we moved Iran back into the oil business, or bigger, and also in Venezuela, what effect do you think that would have on the Iranian government for them to have that flow of cash again?
Senator, I'm probably not the best witness to answer that part of the question. I can tell you from a military stability perspective, which I am competent to talk about, my principal interest in Iran is ensuring that they don't attack us or our partners in the region directly or indirectly, to keep Iran deterred from undertaking those kinds of activities. We have had some success doing that over the last couple of years, not complete success.
But they're still, the indications, they're still basically one of the largest proliferators of terrorist attacks in that part of the world, correct?
That is absolutely correct, Senator.
And basically with Yemen and all that, they're still very much involved there, supplying them.
Iran is the principal reason that the conflict in Yemen can't be brought to a conclusion, in my judgment.
General Townsend, and given us the situation we have in Africa right now, what's your thoughts about that?
Senator, could you, I didn't catch the
I
middle
said just
part.
basically the situation that we have in Africa right now. What are your concerns that you have, the most concerns that you do have?
Thank you. Thanks for repeating the question. Well, I think probably number one is ensuring that the U.S. maintains a strategic access and influence. And I think for me, that the primary concerns there are China and to a little bit lesser degree, Russia. I can go more into detail on that in closed session, but I'm concerned about China's basing ambitions in Africa. And then the second thing would be countering the threats of violent extremists there, primarily Al-Qaeda's arm, Al-Shabaab in East Africa.
Okay, if I could have one further question, Mr. Chairman. My further question would be this. You know, I remember back at I was a young person back in the Cuban Missile Crisis and the concerns we had with nuclear attacks and things and all the tests we ran and everything we were prepared for and all the things we had to go through, exercises. Today we have so many countries with a nuclear arsenal. What's the most dangerous you think that we have? The country that you're most concerned about with a nuclear capabilities that could do harm, not just basically upend the world, approach on the world order, if you will, but basically do damage to the homeland?
Senator, for me, I think I subscribe to what's laid out in our national defense strategy, which is China is the longer-term threat, the basing threat, but today it's Russia.
Senator, I think you have to respect capability. Russia has that capability. China aspires perhaps in the future to have that capability, but I think the acute threat right now, of course, is Russia, and I agree with General Townsend.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Manchin. Senator Ernst, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And gentlemen, thank you very much for being here today, and to your command teams as well. And General McKenzie, thank you so much for your commitment and your service during a very difficult time during that transition in the Middle East. We truly appreciate it. We're grateful. General McKenzie, 2 weeks before the final withdrawal from Afghanistan, the on-the-ground commander of U.S. forces in Afghanistan at that time stated in what are now open source documents that the U.S. forces had targeted and killed over 100 Taliban members who were moving on the city of Kabul on August 14th. Is that correct?
Yeah, Senator, I believe that is correct.
Okay, so we know at that time the situation was very tenuous. The Taliban was on the move. And an official DOD after action reported had clarified that the president and other senior DOD officials' statements, some of which were under oath, and that both on-the-ground commanders and the intelligence community assessed that the government of Afghanistan's capacity to defend the country from being overrun by the Taliban was for 6 to 12 months following the U.S. withdrawal. And those statements were unequivocally false. Were the assessments of Rear Admiral Peter Vasily and General Scott Miller, who were the last two commanders of the U.S. forces in Afghanistan, and yourself, were they passed on to the Office of the Secretary of Defense? Because I think there was a different assessment that came from you and the on-the-ground commanders. Were those assessments passed on to the Office of Secretary of Defense? Were they passed on to the State Department? Were they passed on to the National Security Council?
Senator, I'm confident that my assessments, the assessments of General Miller, as well as subordinate commanders, which informed my assessment, all those were passed to the Secretary and, in fact, to the highest levels of government. And I was present at some of those meetings where those recommendations were discussed.
Were those assessments given to the President?
I believe that at the very highest level, everyone saw and knew these assessments.
Okay. Were you ever involved in a discussion with the President when dissension was voiced?
So, Senator, I won't be able to comment on any discussions I had with the President, but I can tell you this. My position, which I've expressed before in front of this committee, was that in the fall of 2020, it was probably a mistake to go below the level of 4,500, and in the spring of 2021, it was a mistake to go below the level of 2,500. If, in fact, we did so, we expected the government of Afghanistan to collapse. That reflected my opinion, and also the opinion of General Miller. We had an opportunity to freely express that opinion, and I'm confident I was heard. And that is really all a military commander can ever hope to have the opportunity to do. Those decisions to stay or go and what force level you're going to put in Afghanistan are not inherently military decisions. Those are decisions made at the highest level of the United States. And so I appreciated the opportunity to be a part of that discussion.
No, and I appreciate your clarity as well, General McKenzie. Thank you so much. And as well, now that we are out of Afghanistan, we do see that China and Russia are becoming more active in Afghanistan, and they're seeking to capitalize on the void that has been left in that area. What are some of the tools and capabilities that will be required by the United States to really deter our adversaries that are in Afghanistan right now?
So I think primarily it's how you work with the government of Afghanistan, such as it is. We have not formally recognized the Taliban as the formal government, but there are levers that we can apply against that entity, economic levers, diplomatic levers. They seek diplomatic recognition, not principally from the United States, but also from other nations as well. And so there are things that we can, I believe, and it's not a military question really, there are things that we can do to shape their behavior. And I believe our diplomats are working very hard to that end right now.
Very good. Whole of government. And General Townsend, just very briefly, do we see a lot of Russian activity in Africa and the use of contractors, military contractors, other types of contractors? And what are those contractors? And give us your assessment of whether that makes our job more difficult in Africa.
Thanks, Senator. We do see a lot of Russian activity. It's almost all in the form of these private military contractors that you're referring to, namely the Wagner Group and some other smaller ones. They're a malign influence. They don't follow anybody's rules. They do what they want. They buttress dictators. They do gross violations of human rights. I think it's bad for Africa's security and prosperity in the future.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen, again, thanks so much for your service. We truly do appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ernst. Senator Kane, please.